It happens every night the minute before midnight. I feel its slimy tendrils swirling in the air at the foot of my bed. I want to scream, but absolute fear paralyzes me. I close my eyes and wait for the things to slip under my blanket and try to pull me off. They always slip off though, at the last moment where my body is teetering at the edge of the bed. Control of my body slowly returns and I crawl back up my bed holding back sobs so I don't bother the other tenants. I remember the first time it happened to me. I had spent the whole day thinking about girl. I always wanted to ask her out, but she was a freshman and I was a senior. I didn't want everyone to think I was a pedophile or something. But there she was, swinging at the playground I passed on the way to my house every day. It was the first time we were alone out of school. I gathered up some courage and walked to her. "Mind if I take this swing?" I asked as I walked slowly toward the swing next to her. She kept her eyes down and her long brown hair waved a little in the wind. She didn't say anything, so I sat down and started swinging a little. I wasn't really paying attention, but just as I was about to ask her out she had snuck up next to me, raked my arm with her sharp nails screaming something in a foreign language. She stabbed me in the throat with her finger and gave me a creepy doll laugh. I just lay in the little pit under the swing completely frozen. She skipped away. I think her name was Anne. That night I woke up in cold sweat at 11:59 p.m. Weird, I had thought. I usually slept like a baby until morning. That's when I saw those tendrils swirling just beyond my vision, creating unseen shapes. I threw the blanket over my head praying it would protect me from whatever monster lurked. It didn't. I screamed and clawed at my bed while it dragged me toward the edge, slipping off at the last second. The slime soaked my legs as I curled up and sobbed as my parents burst in. They tried to comfort me, but I knew. I knew they would never believe me, that I knew they thought I had just wet the bed or something. But I know now I should have told them. At least tried to convince them. Because now I have no one to turn to. That was 5 years ago. Every night for 5 years I fought back screaming at the top of my lungs. I wait every night wishing for it to finally pull me off and kill me. I wish for death with every step I take toward my bed. I set the alarm for 8 every night hoping that I might have not be awake to hear it. I decide tonight is the night I will bring it to an end. I bring a big kitchen knife to bed. I slash at the tentacles as they slide up my leg, but the knife passes through it like a shadow and I cut my leg. It is only then I realize, the tendrils have always been in my imagination, but I can no longer get rid of them. They have become a dirty, evil part of me. So I keep slashing the knife all over my body until weakness causes my limbs to numb and I drop the knife. I lay there, blood flowing from cuts all over my body, and I feel a sense of peace before my eyes fades into everlasting darkness. With a terrible taste in my mouth, I awoke from a slumber that seemed so deep I would never emerge. Having gone to bed at 1:17 a.m., it was now only 2:47 a.m. My hour and a half of sleep had seemed infinity longer than that, filled with twists and turns of the subconscious dream state. But now, reality was all too real. When I say this taste in my mouth was terrible, I don't mean that standard gopher shit breath every middle-aged man has when he wakes up. This taste was very abrasive and unusual, not bitter, but sickly sweet, making me want to vomit. The closest thing I could compare it to would be the aftertaste of cheap rum mixed with some form of liquefied candy corn. My bare feet touched the cold, hard ground of my new studio apartment, and I walked past my bedroom window and into the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I opened my mouth in hopes of identifying the source of the taste, only to find that my tongue was covered in white gunk, almost like plaque. Confused, I then brushed my tongue and teeth to eliminate the taste, to no avail. Beginning to become restless, I then went into the kitchen. Opening the cabinets one by one, I had my mind set on finding something to cut through this terrible flavor. The best option I found was lemon juice, and began downing it like water. Frustratingly enough, the liquid glided over the plaque on my tongue like a protective film, never even touching my taste buds. Throwing the lemon juice to the ground, I went back into my bedroom. Suddenly and all at once, I was aware of a presence. A warm, throbbing, almost painful sensation came over me, almost like an external source of nerve stimuli, boldly yet calmly letting me know that I wasn't alone. It was the kind of inherent awareness one would experience in a dream, only this wasn't a dream. My instincts directed my attention to my bedroom window, to which, almost in a trance, I then walked to and peered out of. What I saw was the visage of an owl, sitting on a tree branch. Not a screech owl or a spotted owl, but more of a barn owl if I had to guess. It was very large, and almost immaculately white. For the longest time, I was paralyzed, staring into its crimson, saucer-like eyes. I didn't know if I was frightened or intrigued, because this animal wasn't just staring at me, it seemed to be staring relentlessly into me. After at least 4 or 5 minutes of this, the owl then, with an air of utter calm, smiled at me. Looking into its eyes, I felt strangely comforted. The very moment I broke its gaze, however, everything changed. My tongue began throbbing with a writhing pain I can't even describe. Almost like every individual muscle inside of it was tearing itself apart. I ran into the kitchen to put water onto it, but it dried up like acid as soon as it touched. Panicking now, I put everything I could think of on my tongue to help alleviate the pain. Nothing seemed to be helping, but I was determined not to give up until the pain abated. It was 10 minutes later when the swelling began. In addition to the writhing pain that had not let up one iota, now my tongue felt like it was being inflated with air from the inside. Barely able to close my mouth, I ran past my window again towards my bedside. The owl was still there with a smile as big as ever. Reaching for a bottle of ibuprofen, I tried to down a handful at once, hoping it will help the swelling. I was unable to swallow though, and the pills fell abruptly out of my mouth. Nothing seemed to be helping, and in a complete act of desperation, I ran back to the kitchen, past the smiling owl and to the silverware drawer. Opening it, I reluctantly pulled out my sharpest serrated steak knife. Holding my breath, I punctured my tongue with the knife, hoping the wound would release some of the pressure. Instead, all my muscles tightened around the knife hole, making my tongue's pain increase doublefold. Reduced to flailing on the floor now, I did the only thing left that any rational human being would do. I put the knife in my mouth and began sawing at my tongue. The pain of the blade was nothing compared to what I had been experiencing. Once my tongue was halfway severed, I paused for a second so as not to choke on my own blood, which was now pooling quite dramatically on the floor around me. Gagging on the knife blade, I finished the job, ripping the remaining tendrils in half as I yanked the wretched thing out. Showering the floor with blood, my severed tongue landed in front of me, squirming and flapping like a fish out of water. Disgusted and mortified, I kicked it across the floor into the bedroom and closed the kitchen door so as not to see it, and even worse, not to hear it, flapping around. Plugging my mouth with paper towels, trying desperately to maintain the bleeding, I sat crouched in the corner, suspended by shock and disbelief. As my heart rate finally slowed, I was still frozen with fear. So many thoughts were rushing through my mind, they were almost indecipherable. What the hell just happened? Is that a medical condition? Am I dreaming? What was with that owl? Was that an owl? Then, all too suddenly, the most horrifying revelation came over me like a dark cloud. That owl had smiled at me through the window. It is anatomically impossible for an owl to smile. Overcome with a raw sense of primordial dread, I realized the truth. That's not an owl. There is no owl. That's not an owl. I screamed to myself. The glowering question now remained, if it wasn't an owl, what was it? I was beyond caring, I didn't want to know the truth, I didn't even want my tongue back. In that moment, all I wanted was to get away from the owl and back to placid safety. That is when a swooping noise broke my train of thought. Quickly, all fell silent, almost as if things were normal again. After waiting, I slowly opened the kitchen door to find that the severed tongue was gone. Approaching the bloody pool on the ground, I looked out the window once more, which was now strangely open. Staring back at me with crimson eyes, the owl was still perched on the branch, however now, it was poised to open its mouth. What happened next is beyond my realm of understanding. I knew it was impossible, yet it happened anyway. The owl opened its mouth, and with a brand new tongue, spoke to me with an unholy voice. "I will survive," it said. Its smile then spread wider than it had before, revealing a pearly white set of teeth. It was at this point that I blacked out from fear. Once I awoke, the owl was nowhere to be found. The bleeding in my mouth had clotted and I immediately got my things together and headed to the hospital. Once I was in the emergency room, having to communicate with a pad and pencil, I informed the chief surgeon where I came from. A look of general unease came over his face as he reluctantly told me that the previous tenant of my apartment came in exactly 1 month prior, mysteriously missing all of her teeth. As I write this, I am still struggling every day to pacify the darkness. However, I have been able to somehow rid it from my surface conscious. It resides somewhere layers down in my psyche, and it could certainly come to the surface in a moment's notice if I'm not careful. The tiniest stimuli could easily bring this all back, which is why I've lived a very simple life of isolation, where little to no stressors occur to bring about these thoughts. One may think that isolation would make it worse, but that is not the case. That's how these things work. The more these thoughts come to the surface of our conscious, the more we allow our mind to become connected to this other dimension. And with certain personality traits, those who are observant, sympathetic and free-spirited, this is where the struggle comes to play. Most people will remain oblivious to this, especially those who have never seen darkness in their life in the form of trauma, for example. They lack the sensitivity required. Once we have seen some kind of darkness in our lives, we understand it exists, we understand how it feels, as does the mind. I have seen this darkness in my life, and years after seeing it, my mind was hit with a way of dealing with it. I live alone in a rather large house. It began with visual flashes of these amorphous creatures, which still hit me from time to time. They would push themselves against the glass doors as well as the windows of my house, of which are many. Their skin would press up against the glass, increasing in surface area of it, changing the color, taunting me to interact with them. With the shutting of my eyes, the tightening of my fist and thoughts of sanctuary, they would seem to go away. Remember that these were purely flashes of the imagination, I did not take them as a haunting or anything like that. There is a lot of space in this house to be filled with hellish thoughts. I've had flashes of fire imagery as well as blurry beings gazing at me. After a few months of increasing paranoia, I realized that turning on the TV really helped me get through it. I would focus so hard on things like the cooking channel or sports, getting more involved with these things than I ever before was. When I really focus on these things, I only feel a vague sense of being watched, without the imagery or the sounds that sometimes come with these thoughts. I have a very specific TV schedule, where I would also make a lot of snacks and sometimes have beer. This became a ritual of my own. It seems that being in the center of my house is more effective. When I attempt to distance myself up in a corner of the house, I begin to hear sounds. Perhaps this is my mind's way of telling me not to run away from my problems, but I am long past the point of that. I hear footsteps walking towards the room I was in, as well as under me and above me. They seem to kind of leave me alone if I am in the dead center of my home. A memory in which typing about is difficult occurred in my bathroom one night. I was washing my face and I had a very strict regimen I followed in skin care at the time, even being a guy. I often felt a paranoid sense that something would come from behind me as I leaned over the sink to rinse, and do something like stab me in the back. However, I could get over that and shrug it off. That month had been the first month where I officially did not go outside of the house all month, other than the porch for about an hour a day. I remember feeling as if I was the last person on the planet. I had not been in contact with anyone for a long time. No one was even trying to reach me either. As I looked up from splashing my third handful of water on my face, I no longer saw myself, or anything that resembled the bathroom in the mirror's reflection. What I saw instead was a very dead, empty field behind me. It was as if all the life was sucked out of previously prolific farmland, covered in gray and put into my mirror as if it were a painting. It was the most depressing thing I'd ever seen. I could not focus on myself in any sharpness. I was just a nauseating blur in that painting. The painting then faded into night, then blackness, then covering the entire area of the mirror faded in pale, featureless faces pushing against the mirror, as if it were glass and they were on the other side. They all began to scream. It was a deafening, high-pitched sound. When I snapped out of it, there was dead silence other than the sink running and I was just looking at myself wide-eyed in the mirror. I looked sickly. After about a minute of standing there in shock, I turned the sink off, put my night creams on and went down to my living room, where I was sleeping from then on. I often feel like I'm being looked down on whilst sleeping. From both the windows as well as tall beings looking down right next to me as I sleep. Cliché. Sure. But this fear has to be based off something primeval for humans, of which my mind has adopted. Sometimes they will be rapidly moving their mouths, but no sound is heard. Their emotions seem to change as the days pass and they come and go. The glare of the TV, which stays on all night, is the only thing that keeps me here. Keep in mind, I almost never leave my home. Only to stock up on food, about once a month. I cannot handle being in public and only God knows how I actually function in public. I probably have a much different idea of how I act than how I actually act in reality. I don't have much money left, I'm not sure where I'll be in about a year. The house is not the cause of my problems. I will have to make a transition to get to a similar mindset, wherever I end up. These thoughts always stay with me in some way, shape or form and I'll never be the same. After 2 years of experiencing these haunting thoughts, I've been able to control them in a large way. This isn't a ghost story, rather a look into a very damaged psyche, something that can happen to many people. I still don't believe these are spirits, ghosts or creatures from hell. I think all of those things reside within us and for many, is trying to get out more and more every day. A good friend of mine once told me many years ago, we make our own hell. I no longer have friends, or anybody for that matter, but I wholeheartedly agree with him.